Welcome and thank you so much for joining the State of Events podcast. My name is Sonia Alcazar Collier, owner and operator of Cinch Events and Productions. We're trusting all is well in your communities, as well as with your loved ones during this challenging time. A little about the panel contributing to this series. We're a team of event professionals who have obviously been incredibly impacted by the health crisis. And we've heard from people who have concerns that range from, what am I going to do about the wedding I planned? What about this graduation party that I coordinated? I produce an annual fundraiser, a gala. We've also heard so many stories from fellow business owners and entrepreneurs and service providers about how their businesses have been significantly impacted. So in response to that, we got together and created this 3-part series designed to resource, empower, and support you. In this series, we'll be addressing some best practices in rescheduling and restructuring your event. And on today's panel is my dear friend and colleague, Zoe Moore of LB Alliance. Hello, Mrs. Moore.
Hey, what's going on? Hey, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let me actually correct that. I said Mrs. Moore, but you are all the way on the market, so you are a Miss Moore, okay?
Well, if South Africa wasn't on lockdown, I might, have a quarantine day, but, we'll talk about that on another podcast.
Another podcast, different podcast. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your company and what it is that you do?
Oh, sure. So again, Zoe Moore with LB Alliance. It's an event resource group. It does advocacy, promotion, and support of underrepresented professionals. And what that means is if you look at the industry as a whole, hospitality with the sector of meetings, events, and tourism, we are underrepresented. And that underrepresentation leads to lack of professional development, access to information when it comes to large events that are coming to different cities, and just building the infrastructure of our businesses. So I act as a broker, both for financial gain, but also more just to connect professionals together and encourage collaboration. So
Right.
That's LB Alliance. And
that's great.
However I can help professionals.
That's great. What a wealth of resource. In addressing these best practices, I want to talk a little bit about the different resources and relief support that might be out there for people. So can you first just give us some advice on COVID and how to move forward or not move forward during a time of crisis?
Yeah, most definitely. I think, the first piece of advice that I would offer a professional doesn't seem business related, but it is. And it's about staying informed. We have to be very careful in this time where we're getting our information from. And so when we talk about being an event professional in this industry, I'm going to advise people first to go to associations. Associations like Meeting Professionals International or the Event Industry Council. And there's several others that I can mention that are basically collating information and giving out resources as it relates to best industry practices. And so they're taking the advice from other organizations like CDC, the Center for Disease Control, or WHO, the World Health Organization, and they're collating that as it relates to what we do and how we operate. And so staying informed is really key because there's so much social media posts and different advice coming from, different places. But as a professional, to make sure that you're not falling into that trap and letting fear guide you, use associations, websites, and your membership to access your network. Go to organizations like WHO and CDC, and then also select a local news source that is credible, right? And using relevant information, not just trying to get, their ratings up, but it's actually keeping you informed about, your policies that are in place, the shelter-in-place orders, staying at home, and use these sources as your regular sources of information. It's good to compare and contrast where you get your information from, but if you have a regular routine and you get your information from these sources, you'll stay best informed. And that's how I would advise it. Staying informed is key. Then, once you have all this information, after you process everything that's going on, I think it's key to figure out what alternatives are existing out there. We were all using different platforms to do virtual meetings. Now that need has increased, right?
Right.
I love Zoom. I love Google Hangouts. Now we're actually having to use those sources as our main way of operating, right? And so that means it's key for us to learn what's out there. Add that into your routine after you're staying informed to make sure that you understand how these platforms work. What's the best way to use Zoom to do a meeting versus just doing a webinar or doing a podcast. Take some time to read about how these tools are going to best work for you. And then you also want to look at just how you're going to turn your face-to-face conferences to virtual. There are still logistics that are involved with that. There are still different things that you have to do to make sure you're having a successful event, right? You also want to look at, once this virtual need, if we ever go back to the way things were, how are we now going to take all the advice that we have about COVID and roll into how we do our future events, right? And I often say, let's not focus on the when. People are trying to figure out, when are we going to reschedule our events? We just talked about, before we hopped on the call, how the state of Virginia just issued their shelter-in-place order until June. So as we're trying to project when these events are going to start back up,
it's hard to do that, right?
It's hard to do that, right? And I believe that kind of focus on the when will drive a lot of people to become more frustrated. Instead, we focus on the what and the how. Not only how are you using these virtual platforms to continue doing business, or in the aspect of the show must go on, what are you going to do when it's time to start preparing and implementing new event logistics, right? Like, we know that social distancing is not something that's going to, in a snap, go away. It's not going to just disappear once the bans are lifted or once the orders are lifted. People are still going to be very weary, and it's also going to be advised that we keep social distancing order. So now you know that in your event, your signage has to reflect and remind your attendees about the 5 steps to kick out COVID, right? How can you...
Oh, that's clever. Did you make that up? I love that.
No, definitely not. These are just different ideas and different things and resources that you see. NTI is advising, different networks are talking about creative and innovative ways, right?
Right.
How to properly use your staff to, be hospitable and remind people to go ahead and, separate. That 4 to 6 feet is still important. Use this hand sanitizer. Maybe you can use hand sanitizer to brand your theme, or brand your business onto the hand sanitizer or face mask. Equipment and supplies are going to be key to having successful events when that win does come around. But right now, it's like, what strategies can you rely on when we return back to that sense of normalcy? If there was because maybe normal wasn't working. But it's key to figuring out, when I began to look at signage, my staffing, equipment, and setup, how am I using the information that I'm getting, like I said, from these associations, from credible sources like WHO or CDC and your local news source? How can I roll that into my event now using virtual spaces? And then, how will I incorporate it into my practices as a professional? Because these clients are going to be relying on you. They want to celebrate. They want to, get their business objectives. It's not up to the client to be the professional. You are key and instrumental. That's why we are needed to help people, even when they're doing something virtual, to stay on track, to stay on time, to make sure they're hitting their event logistics, to handle the tech behind the scenes, right? You are the professional. So this downtime is good to take a pause, because that's what I did. Is I definitely took a pause. But also start thinking about professional development on how you're going to be the expert post-COVID. Everybody's going to have a lot of advice, but begin to structure your business not in, living in the past, because the past is gone, and not to be morbid, but
Or directing everyone out. I feel like also too, when we are not making sure that we're resourcing ourselves with this information, then we land up just directing people out to, well, go on the CDC website, go on this. But honestly, if I'm a hectic bride, I'm not trying to go on the CDC website. I want my planner or my coordinator or the professional to have already done that work about that. I want to actually ask a question because this is, I know we're going to address this in the next question, but so you talked a little bit about restructuring your event to now, everyone's doing these online, these virtual events. If I'm a professional and I've set my rates before this all, before the whole lockdown started, I set my rates, for whatever my rates were. If I'm going to now offer this service and I have to curtail it, should I be thinking about lowering my rate? Should I be thinking about, the different manpower that's required now? How do I actually restructure my rates to service the sort of new direction that events are going to be going in naturally?
Yeah, definitely good question. The infrastructure of our business is key to sustainability. So,
Say that again. Say that again.
Our infrastructure is key to the sustainability of our business.
So good.
Processes and procedures, understanding our finances, understanding marketing. You really can't have a business without those things. So when we're talking about budgeting and pricing right now, there's several factors, right, to the bottom line. We have the triple bottom line when we start thinking about people over profit in the space where we need empathy. And we need empathy that needs to be the most thing that's contagious right now, is because financial strain is real and events need to go on. But you also, as a small business owner or an event professional, a vendor, supplier, venue, whatever service that you're offering needs to cover your expenses. And so that is the perspective I say that, people focus on. What are your expenses that you have to cover? Just like you would if you were doing an in-person event, there are some base expenses you have to cover, whether that's to cover Zoom, your Zoom account, whether that's to cover, Facebook, your marketing, whatever you have to cover is to calculate that, make sure you cover that. And then, for your time, you're not having to use gas. You're not having to go out and buy coffee anymore. So these expenses are lowered in the things that you have to do an activity to have a meeting. And now you're you're sheltering in place. So your business is sheltered in place. You also don't want to sink because you need to lower your costs. So I always default to transparency. You let people know what your rates are and what they cover and what, the benefits are of working or getting your consultation, and then leave that window of opportunity for them to also express to you where they are. You're going to see an increase in bartering happening right now. So that bartering means that you have a service and then someone has either a service or knowledge to offer you. So be open and flexible to how your base expenses get covered, but also how you can help exchange information and knowledge and resources in this time, because that's where empathy kicks in. No one wants to cheat you out of your time or make you go way below what you're worth. But people are in need right now, and it will return onto you, tenfold, 100-fold when you invest into others, and they'll invest back into you.
So from your experience as a business professional or an entrepreneur, if I've lost a significant amount of income so far due to this crisis, or any crisis for that matter, what are some funding options and financial resources that are available to me?
Oh, very good question. So in this space now, we're trying to figure out what's next. And we are in a great time, honestly, because we're seeing that these different organizations like the Small Business Administration are starting to step up, the SBDCs, the SBAs, SCORE. You have even corporations that are starting to step in there, Facebook, Amazon. Some of these opportunities or funds and grants and loans are hyper-localized, but with enough research. And also going right back to our reliance on associations. As an event professional, I can't stress anymore. I mean, I continue to stress the need for professionals to join an association, because these associations are collating that information, and they have it listed on their websites. They're putting it out on their social media. So if you become very familiar with those networks, you have just a space or a network of people who are professionals and different vendors, different suppliers, different companies who are offering exchange of resources. But there are, Facebook alone is giving away like $100 million in cash, grants, and ad credits. So that's just one of the small resources that are out there. Amazon is doing some activity in Seattle. So look to, again, when you are staying informed about COVID, stay informed about the resources that are out there by going to credible resources. And I can't stress that enough, because looking at the association, looking directly to even your state and its government website, using the links that are on there. I just seen an ad that said it was sponsored today, and it was like COVID relief, but I don't know where that's going to lead, and I don't know who I'm giving my information to. So do not always rely on someone else sharing a link from a link. If they mention to go to SBDC, or they say go to SBA, go directly to that website. Find out what you need. Do your research, because loans will not be for everybody. Do not get yourself into a bind, even post-COVID, that you couldn't get into pre-COVID. So make sure you're doing your research, getting credible resources. You're looking at these alternate options to operate and keep your staff employed. And it may not mean that you have to shut down your business if you do not have the funds. But again, think of alternative ways, how to reduce operations, and also how to communicate with these different companies that are doing, they're not charging people during these times because they understand there's going to be a financial loss.
Right.
So be comfortable with communicating to the different people that you're working with, or different services that you get, to let them know about where you are.
Right.
Be fully transparent and authentic. So, there's so many different resources out there. So rely on your network. Like this is all about us as professionals talking. It's all about us showing that we can collaborate, not just for, executing for a client or getting the money or contract, but that we are a support system for one another.
Right. So good. I love this collaborative and partnership space. I think that has been an art, a lost art. I think we went into a season just as businesses and entrepreneurs, a long extended season, probably more like, a couple of decades of, just this competitive nature and just, identifying who your competitors are. And I think what you've done is you've actually tried to shift that narrative, shift the culture back to, hey, you know what, we're only really going to get farther together. And with recognizing that we actually can pull together, not only during this season, but in all seasons, we can pull together all of our resources, and our reach can be expanded even further than we thought. So thank you for all you're doing with your business. How can someone utilize your services, or do you have still a component in the structure and model of your company to where someone can actually reach out to you? And then how do we find you? What are your hashtags? What are your handles?
Wow. Yeah. So I'm in transition right now,
awesome.
As all businesses I'm sure are.
Right.
And I'm scaling back on how I want to be accessible. However, I love talking to people. Consulting is always an option. Okay. Emailing me info@lotusbaseline.com. That domain or website will be coming down because I'm having to scale back, what I pay for or what's outgoing.
Of course.
Social media is at Lotus Baseline. That's across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I do have a Facebook group, LB Alliance Event Resource Group. You can hit me up in that. My phone number is readily out there. If you know me personally, most people I work with know me personally, or if you, like I said, email me, I'll answer back. I'm not as quick to respond on email right now because honestly, I'm taking some time to spend with my son
of course,
and figure out what's next. And that's a key piece of advice that I would give during the time of COVID is don't be so amped up to figure it all out right now. Give yourself some time to process. That's what I'm doing, but I'm accessible. I like to help people. It's very important to me that I sustain financially as well. So we can always figure something out on how to support each other. I'm really keen to try to find some educational resources. But yeah, hit me up at Lotus Baseline across all social media platforms. Email again is info@lotusbaseline.com, and slide in my DM.
That's great. Sliding Miss Moore.
Yes,
Miss Moore.
Miss Moore,
That's great. That's great.
Shout out to maybe one day Mrs. David, but we'll talk about that in another podcast.
Different podcast, y'all. Different podcast.
Different podcast.
Right, right. Thank you so much for your contribution today. We're excited to continue exploring this topic. We have been, in case you're just joining us or you're interested in listening to our follow-up segments, we've been addressing the best rescheduling and restructuring practices for your event. And today we've covered resources and relief with Zoe Moore of Lotus Baseline Alliance, LB Alliance. And we look forward to you.
Let's blossom together.
Yes. Let's blossom together. I love that. I love that. I've been using that for a couple years now, and it has definitely, it's definitely come off of the paper and become a reality partnering with you. So thank you all so much for listening in, and please make sure you catch our follow-up segments in which we'll be addressing some marketing and some virtual event spaces. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.